They stood shivering in the bitter cold, their breaths visible in the frosty air, as the landlord tossed their clothes into a roaring fire. The children's cries pierced the night, their small voices pleading for warmth, for mercy, but he didn't stop. The flames devoured their belongings, each item a piece of their lives, reduced to ash before their eyes. This wasn't just a dispute. It was a deliberate act of cruelty, a moment that would haunt the Thompson family forever. Where are you watching from? Are you in the USA, the UK, or somewhere else? Maybe Chicago, London, or a small town anywhere in the world? Share your thoughts on this story, and let's talk about what justice looks like in the face of such heartlessness. Stay with me as we dive into this harrowing account. They were a family like any other, trying to make ends meet in a world that often seemed stacked against them. The Thompsons, Leila, Marcus, and their 3 children, Aaliyah, Jamal, and little Keshia, lived in a modest rental house on the outskirts of Detroit, Michigan. It was 2018, and the city's harsh winters were unforgiving, especially for families scraping by. Leila worked long hours as a nurse's aide, while Marcus juggled 2 jobs, one as a delivery driver and another as a part-time mechanic. Their children were bright, full of dreams, but life in their neighborhood was tough. The house they rented was old, with creaky floors and drafty windows, but it was home. They paid their rent on time, kept the place tidy, and tried to stay out of trouble. Their landlord, Ronald Whitaker, was a man known for his temper and his impatience. He owned several properties in the area, most of them run down, and he wasn't shy about letting his tenants know who was in charge. To him, the Thompsons were just another family in one of his properties, but to them, he was a looming presence, always quick to complain about minor issues. A late payment by a day, a toy left in the yard, or a noise complaint from a neighbor. Still, the Thompsons did their best to keep the peace. They didn't want trouble. They just wanted to live their lives, but trouble found them. It started with a small disagreement over a repair. The furnace in the house had been acting up for weeks, sputtering and failing to keep the place warm. Leila had called Whitaker multiple times, leaving voicemails about the freezing nights and the children bundling up in blankets to sleep. He promised to send someone, but no one came. Marcus even offered to fix it himself if Whitaker would cover the parts, but the landlord dismissed him, saying it wasn't his job to coddle tenants. The tension simmered, but no one could have predicted how it would explode. It was a frigid January evening when everything unraveled. The temperature had plummeted to single digits, and the Thompson family was huddled in the living room, wrapped in coats and blankets, trying to stay warm. The furnace had finally given out completely, and the house was like an icebox. Leila had called Whitaker again that morning, her voice firm but polite, explaining that the children were cold and that something needed to be done. Whitaker's response was curt, "I'll handle it when I handle it." But by 6 p.m., there was still no repairman, no heat, and no sign of Whitaker. Then they heard it, a loud knock at the door. Marcus opened it to find Whitaker standing there, his face red with anger, a pickup truck idling in the driveway. Behind him were 2 men, burly and silent, their expressions unreadable. Whitaker didn't waste time with pleasantries. "You think you can keep calling me, harassing me about this damn furnace?" he shouted, his voice carrying into the street. Leila stepped forward, trying to calm him down. "We're not harassing you, Mr. Whitaker. The kids are freezing. We just need the heat fixed." But Whitaker wasn't listening. He pushed past Marcus, storming into the house, his boots tracking snow onto the floor. "You people think you can tell me how to run my business," he spat, his words dripping with venom. The children, huddled on the couch, looked up in fear. Aaliyah, the eldest at 12, clutched her younger siblings, trying to shield them from the man's rage. What happened next was unthinkable. Whitaker turned to the 2 men and barked, "Get their stuff." Before the Thompsons could react, the men began grabbing clothes from the coat rack, the laundry basket, even the kids' backpacks. Leila screamed, "What are you doing?" But Whitaker ignored her, leading the men outside to a metal barrel in the backyard. Marcus followed, his heart pounding, demanding answers. That's when they saw it, a fire already burning in the barrel, flames licking the cold air. Whitaker didn't hesitate. He grabbed an armful of clothes from one of the men and threw them into the fire. The fabric caught quickly, the flames roaring higher as jackets, sweaters, and even Keshia's favorite pink scarf went up in smoke. The children ran outside, their cries cutting through the night. "Stop it! That's our stuff!" Jamal sobbed, his small fists clenched. Keshia wailed, her voice raw as she watched her scarf disappear into the flames. Leela tried to grab Whitaker's arm, pleading, "Please, stop, those are all we have," but he shoved her away, his eyes wild with rage. "You want to complain about the furnace," he yelled. "Maybe you'll think twice before you disrespect me again." Marcus lunged forward, trying to pull the clothes from the barrel, but one of the men blocked him, pushing him back with a rough shove. The neighbors began to gather, drawn by the commotion, but no one stepped in. They watched in stunned silence as the fire consumed the Thompsons' belongings, the smoke rising into the dark sky. The confrontation reached a boiling point when Leela, tears streaming down her face, shouted, "You can't do this to us. We've done nothing wrong." Whitaker turned to her, his voice low and menacing. "You're lucky I don't throw you out right now," he said. "You don't like it. Get out of my house." The children clung to their parents, their cries growing louder as the reality sank in. They were losing everything, and there was no one to stop it. The fire burned for what felt like an eternity, though it was only minutes. By the time it died down, the Thompsons were left with nothing but the clothes on their backs and a few items that hadn't been grabbed. The neighbors, still watching from their porches, whispered among themselves, but no one called the police. In that moment, the Thompsons felt utterly alone, abandoned by the system, by their community, by the very man who was supposed to provide them shelter. Marcus, his voice shaking with anger, confronted Whitaker one last time. "You think this is power, burning our kids' clothes? You're a coward." Whitaker smirked, unfazed. "You'll be out by the end of the week," he said, climbing into his truck. The two men followed, and they drove off, leaving the Thompsons standing in the cold, the smell of smoke clinging to their skin. Leela gathered her children, pulling them close, trying to comfort them even as her own heart broke. Aaliyah, still clutching her siblings, whispered, "Why does he hate us, Mama?" Leela didn't have an answer. She wanted to tell her daughter it wasn't about hate, that it was just a misunderstanding, but the words wouldn't come. The truth was too heavy, too raw. They were a black family in a neighborhood where they'd always felt like outsiders, and Whitaker's actions felt like a deliberate message. "You don't belong here." The next morning, the Thompsons tried to pick up the pieces. Marcus went to work, his mind racing with thoughts of how to keep his family safe. Leela called a local legal aid organization, her voice trembling as she recounted the previous night's events. The lawyer on the other end listened quietly, then explained that they had grounds to sue Whitaker for destruction of property and emotional distress, but it would be a long, uphill battle. "Landlord-tenant disputes are tricky," the lawyer said. "And with someone like Whitaker, who's got money and connections, it's not going to be easy." The Thompsons didn't have much, but they had each other. They spent the day salvaging what they could, borrowing clothes from a neighbor who finally stepped forward to help. The community began to rally, albeit slowly. A local church organized a clothing drive, and a few neighbors started a petition to hold Whitaker accountable. But the damage was done. The children were traumatized, their sense of security shattered. Keshia stopped talking for days, her eyes distant, while Jamal became angry, lashing out at anyone who tried to comfort him. Aaliyah, ever the protector, tried to hold her family together, but even she was struggling. As the days passed, the Thompsons faced new challenges. Whitaker sent an eviction notice, claiming they'd violated the lease by causing a disturbance. It was a lie, but he had the resources to make it stick. The family's lawyer fought back, filing a countersuit, but the legal process was slow, and the Thompsons were running out of time. They couldn't afford to move, not with their savings depleted and the cost of replacing their belongings. Every night, they huddled together in the cold house, the furnace still broken, their future uncertain. The story began to spread. A local journalist caught wind of the incident and published an article, detailing Whitaker's actions and the Thompsons' plight. The article went viral, shared across social media platforms, and soon, people from across the country were reaching out, offering donations, clothes, and words of support. But not everyone was sympathetic. Some defended Whitaker, claiming he was within his rights as a property owner. Others questioned the Thompsons, asking why they hadn't just paid for the furnace themselves or moved out sooner. The debate raged online, turning the family's pain into a public spectacle. Then came the twist. During the legal proceedings, the Thompsons' lawyer uncovered a pattern. Whitaker had done this before, not burning clothes, but intimidating tenants, especially black families, to force them out of his properties. Court records showed multiple lawsuits against him, most settled out of court with gag orders. One former tenant, a single mother named Denise, came forward with a similar story. Whitaker had shut off her water during a dispute, leaving her and her children without access for days. Another tenant, an elderly black man, said Whitaker had once threatened to bulldoze his garden if he didn't pay an illegal maintenance fee. The evidence was damning, but Whitaker wasn't going down without a fight. He hired a high-powered attorney and countersued the Thompsons for defamation, claiming their story was exaggerated. The legal battle dragged on, draining the family's energy and resources, but the community's support grew stronger. A crowdfunding campaign raised enough money to cover their legal fees and replace some of their belongings. Protesters gathered outside Whitaker's office, demanding justice. The pressure was mounting, and for the first time, Whitaker looked rattled. In the end, the Thompsons won a partial victory. The court ruled in their favor, ordering Whitaker to pay for the destroyed property and emotional damages, but the eviction notice stood. The family was forced to move, finding a new home in a different part of the city. It wasn't perfect, but it was warm, and it was theirs, at least for now. Whitaker faced no criminal charges, a bitter pill for the Thompsons to swallow. Still, their story sparked a broader conversation about tenant rights and racial discrimination in housing, inspiring others to speak out. The Thompsons are still healing. Leila and Marcus are working to rebuild their lives, determined to give their children a better future. Aaliyah dreams of becoming a lawyer, inspired by the fight for justice. Jamal's anger has softened, replaced by a quiet resilience. Keshia, though still shy, has started to smile again, her laughter a small victory in itself. What about you? Where are you watching this from? New York, Manchester, or somewhere else? Have you ever faced injustice like the Thompsons? Share your story, and let's keep this conversation going. Let's demand accountability for landlords like Whitaker and support families fighting for their rights. Stay engaged, because stories like this matter, and together, we can make a difference.